Sex sells alludes to the practice of using sex and sexually appealing content for marketing and to sell product. This is usually in advertising, for example, Calvin Klein and Victoria's Secret, and practically almost any product that we use on a day-to-day basis. However, although it started off in advertising, it's eventually seeped into our movies, with Hollywood using sex and attractiveness to appeal towards certain demographics. The concept of sex sells was first discussed by Canadian sociologist Erving Goffman in his 1979 book Gender Advertisement, where he analyzes how gender is represented in advertising, to which we are all commonly exposed to. While doing my research, I came across an article from the University of Chicago Press journals that I feel encapsulates what Goffman was talking about. It's written by Sherry Cavan, and this is very long, but hold tight because it's relevant. She says, ultimately, Goffman defines gender displays as conventionalized portraits of sex that gives others the impression of femininity and masculinity. Although alas, he focuses only on the former and on the various ways in which femininity can be displayed, he focuses only on the idealized bourgeois image of heterosexual sex. She further goes on to say, Goffman argues that this idealized bourgeois image of heterosexual sex is drawn from parent-child imagery. The male is fashioned after the parent, and the female fashioned after the child. From the natural, in this case biological, asymmetry of parent-child imagery, dominance and subordination are naturally, in this case ideologically, incorporated into masculine and feminine displays of gender. This essentially means that the way sex has been portrayed is usually in the form of gender expectations. Men being the leaders, the parent as she puts it, and women being the followers, the children, the ones who must listen to the men. This was the norm for heterosexual relationships, and to some extent it still is. Even in some non-heterosexual relationships, this dynamic still exists, taking on responsibilities that fit into your sex or gender expression. This is very accurate, especially when we consider that in the mid-20th century, advertisements portrayed women mostly at home, being mums and housewives and under the guardianship of their husbands, who were the breadwinners, as was proven in a study by Courtney and Lucret in 1979. Women were advertised that way because that was the expectations on women to marry and have children. However, towards the end of the 20th century and by the early to mid 21st century, companies started to use sex to sell products, and that meant sexualizing women. For example, the Victoria's Secret fashion show was first held in 1995, and although the products are targeted towards women, the show itself was targeted towards men. I mean, that was the whole concept of the brand. The founder, Roy Raymond, was inspired after trying to buy lingerie for his wife. He thought everything looked ugly and felt like an intruder. I mean, who would expect that a store for women would make a man feel like an intruder, but okay. Especially in the 80s and 90s. Something I noticed as well is how in the earliest years of the fashion show, the clothes and lingerie worn by the models seemed more practical and things that women would actually buy and wear. And slowly the show became more and more about a fantasy and leaned into the sexualization of the products and the models. The entire concept of Victoria's Secret is a fantasy for men. And it's not a surprise that in 2018, the then Chief Marketing Officer of Victoria's Secret, Edward Razik, expressed an aversion to casting trans models and plus-size models in the Victoria's Secret fashion show. He'd previously also said fatphobic comments such as, "We're not a potato chip company," as to why there would never be a model of bigger size on the Victoria's Secret runway. So I think it's fair to state that Victoria's Secret was never for women, and the fact that this is the least of its problematic history says a lot. It's also really important to state that the brand wasn't just detrimental to a lot of women and girls who watched the show and developed eating disorders because they didn't look like the women on the runway. It was also detrimental to the models who would starve themselves to the point of not consuming anything, not even water, days leading up to the show, so that they could look their thinnest. The scary thing is that there are tons of people trying this diet on YouTube, and if you watch some of the older videos, it's kind of similar to the phenomenon that's the K-pop diet, with people eating almost nothing and starving themselves and doing excessive exercise as well. Barbara Palvin even openly spoke about watching people eat instead of actually just eating, and only eating what she wanted as soon as the show was over. Essentially, reality, the image Victoria's Secret portrayed and marketed wasn't even realistic for the models they used to market those images. I can't say I'm upset about the decline in TV viewers for them. I almost prefer the candidness to the other side of the coin, where models pretend to eat only junk food, even though the public has seen them have a dramatic weight loss. And they always pick pizza or pasta because for some reason, the media and the entertainment industry spent decades demonizing carbs that it's now become the food of choice for show. This doesn't just apply to Victoria's Secret, but there are so many stories of models being told to go back to their prepubescent weight, and the reality is, a lot of models are exposed to this unhealthy culture from a very young age. That's why they think it's normal to starve themselves to the point of literally not even hydrating.
What I was receiving for many years was that my body was not right. And it's almost impossible to erase that.
And that's why a lot of Victoria's Secret models were so comfortable speaking publicly about the unhealthy lengths they would go so they could look like what was promoted as sex appeal. And although I'm sure most of these practices still occur, with how society has changed, we're getting more junk food only models representing another type of unhealthy, unattainable diets. There has been countless former Victoria's Secret models who have talked about their harrowing experiences working for the brand, and some of them even participated in a docuseries that exposes some of the dark secrets of Victoria's Secret and its links to Epstein. There are several types of ways that companies market their products with the appeal of sex. One of them I've already discussed, which is gender roles, which was mostly prevalent in the mid-20th century, where they used advertisements to promote femininity and masculinity, focusing on women in the home, promoting women's liberation, while also delineating the limits of this newfound freedom.
I can't type. I don't take dictation. I won't sharpen pencils. I can't file. My boss calls me indispensable.
In the 1979 study that I've previously mentioned by Courtney and Lucrette, they also found that in magazine advertisements, women were shown as dependent on men's protection, regarded as sexual objects or as domestic adjuncts by men, and while women were most often shown for ads for cleaning products and food products, men were most often shown in ads for cars, travel, alcoholic beverages, banks, etc.
Drinkable.
Pretty harsh.
Well, so's your coffee. You know, the girls down at the office make better coffee on their hot plates. Well, see you later.
And he didn't even kiss me goodbye. You know, if I could just make a decent cup of coffee, I could relax. So, relax. Why don't you try Instant Folgers? Tastes good as fresh perked. Good as fresh perked. I'll surprise Harvey for his birthday tonight.
Hey, great coffee.
It's Instant Folgers. Doesn't it taste good as fresh perked?
Better.
Better than those girls make at the office?
Honey, their coffee can't hold a candle to yours.
You run your mill with the same kind of skill that's been passed through your family to you. You're the kind of a man who likes to work with his hands. Beechnut's the tobacco you chew. Beechnut's the tobacco you chew, and it's been that way, father and son, for a long time. Beechnut's smoother, moister, more delicious. Try it.
Further in the 20th century and going into the 21st century, it was normal to see ads promoting products for men using women as props to highlight the masculinity, power and control of the man next to her.
I love being under house arrest. What do I get for good behavior?
Other types of ways that companies used to promote their products were physical attractiveness, sexual behavior, sexual reference, and sexual embeds. I'm sure we can all figure what physical attractiveness means in this context. Looking a certain way, having a particular physique and features that is considered attractive. Sexual behavior is also very straightforward, using flirtatious body language, open posture, making eye contact with the audience, and having multiple models interacting with each other in a sexual manner. It is significant to state, though, that these models participating in these sexual behaviors have to be physically and conventionally attractive, or else you're going to get a bunch of alpha males complaining that brands are promoting unhealthy lifestyles, or just because they only want to see women that they're physically attracted to. Sexual reference are implicit use of sex that the viewers is supposed to interpret as sexual, and can be done using double entendre or innuendos. The final type is sexual embeds, which is used by advertisers when they don't want consumers to be consciously aware they're using sex to sell a product. This can include subliminal elements that are detected as sexual information solely at the subconscious level. It can use sounds, words such as moist and luscious, and the positioning of product to unconsciously trigger sexual arousal in the consumer to tempt them into purchasing that product. This can be the most difficult to recognize, as sometimes we're not even aware when it's being used on us. I mean, that's its purpose. It's also relevant to state that advertisers can use multiple of these types, if not all of them, in one advert. From what we've gathered so far, it's that sex used to sell, but for the younger generation like myself who have grown up with a more progressive mindset and a better understanding from a younger age about topics such as consent, sex is no longer used or is unable to be used anymore as a tool to sell us movies. An example of this is the difference between Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon. One of the biggest criticisms of Game of Thrones was its problem with sex and its brutality against women. The showrunners had a tendency to use sex and sexual assault for shock value, with no regard to the plot or its necessity to the show. With House of the Dragon, from the beginning, it was made clear that the show would pull back from the amount of sex featured in comparison to Game of Thrones, and that if it needed to be depicted, it would be depicted carefully and thoughtfully. Sex that's depicted is done more tastefully and even artistically, like we see in episode 4 with Rhaenyra and Kristen Cole. And any sexual brutality, for example, the rape of the maid in episode 8, takes place off screen, with only the aftermath depicted. Even in episode 4, when we see Alicent's and Viserys, it's not graphic. We can infer Alicent's displeasure in this moment from her eyes. We can infer that we're supposed to know she's not into it because it's depicted in direct contrast to Rhaenyra, who is in a brothel with her uncle Daemon, being taught that sex can be pleasurable for women. Most recently, Penn Badgley spoke out about his strong dislike for filming intimate scenes and how he asked the showrunner of You if they could reduce the amount for season 4. He said, "That aspect of Hollywood has always been very disturbing to me, and that aspect of the job, that mercurial boundary, has always been something that I actually don't want to play at all." He went on to say he wishes he wouldn't have to partake in any sex scenes and that it's important to him in his real life not to have them and for the fidelity of his relationship. In season 4 of You, not only did they reduce the amount of sex scenes, but all the sex scenes in the season were performed fully clothed. He received support and backlash, and I think that's kind of sad because in the post-Me Too era, he's making a decision with what he does with his body that doesn't affect the show he's in. His acting doesn't change, but because he doesn't want to have sex on screen, some people are giving him more backlash than their favorite problematic celebrities. He gave consent about what he's comfortable and not comfortable doing on screen. He made clear what his boundaries are, and the fact that he's able to do that in an industry that has issues with consent is a testament to the showrunners and those running the set of You. This is the bare minimum, but that's what we're working with. Some of the most popular movies don't include any sex or sometimes any physically intimate scenes. To put it into perspective, none of the top 10 grossing movies of 2022 contained any intimate or sex scenes. Additionally, movies that have either had sequels or remakes have strayed away from the intimacy levels that was presented in their originals. An example of this is Top Gun Maverick's sex scene that takes place off screen in comparison to the original, which didn't shy away from showing it on screen. And I literally had to cut that scene short because I was starting to feel uncomfortable. It honestly felt like a scene that went on for too long. I also have to mention the MCU and how, although it's arguably the most successful franchise, there's very little sex or intimate scenes. However, I do have to mention that although there's minimal explicit sex scenes in any of the MCU movies, they do sexualize their actors, men and women. We all know the Marvel training regime. We've seen actors bulk up, have their appearances changed by nothing less than plastic surgery. Even the costumes we see these superheroes in is sexualizing. Only Black Widow can be saving the world with perfect hair and makeup. They might not be selling us sex, but they're definitely selling us sexuality.
I think you look great, Cap. As far as I'm concerned, that's America's ass.
The MCU uses physical attractiveness to promote their movies and the subsequent products that come from running a comic book franchise. We saw beloved comedy actors like Chris Pratt and Kumail Nanjiani become almost unrecognizable after their intense diets and training that Kumail has associated with his heightened unhealthy relationship with food. Even House of the Dragon, that I previously mentioned has significantly reduced the amount of sex it portrays, also uses physical attractiveness with the characters. I'm sure we can remove Viserys from this list because by episode 8, most of us were gagging when he removed his mask, but for the majority of the characters, they're way more attractive than their book counterparts. Rhaenyra was supposed to be about 50 pounds heavier, but that wouldn't be attractive to the viewers. Even with the casting, before Emma Darcy had even made her debut in the role as Order Rhaenyra, people already decided that they weren't attractive enough because they knew they were attracted to Millie Alcock, who plays a younger Rhaenyra and is more conventional in how they appear.
What's your drink of choice?
A Negroni.
I was going to say the same thing. Yeah.
Magliato. With Prosecco in it.
Oh, stunning.
Yeah.
However, once people saw the transformation of Emma Darcy into the role of Rhaenyra, instead of complaining that they weren't attractive enough, it became about people giving their unsolicited opinions about how they would be more attractive if they conformed.
Bombastic side-eye. Criminal offensive side-eye.
It's clear that although sex in its most crude form no longer sells, specifically to the younger generation, it does still sell, but more covertly. Although we're not seeing as many sex scenes on our screens, and although we as consumers are demanding to see more physical diversity, ultimately the ideal body type remains the same. That would explain why the heroin chic look that was seen as attractive in the 90s and early 2000s is coming back, as well as the fashion trends that were deemed as attractive. We're getting the physically attractive superheroes who aren't doing sex scenes, and although in movies we see less sex depicted on screen, it's still thriving on TV with shows like Euphoria, Sex Education and House of the Dragon, albeit very differently on Euphoria, as Sam Levinson likes to sexualize every scene that depicts teenagers for absolutely no reason or cruciality to the plot. I literally wrote and shelved this script for months before The Idol even came out, and ironically, what I said about the menace that is Sam Levinson applies even more now. I'm praying for his downfall.
When my wife read me the article, I looked at her and I just said, I think we're about to have the biggest show of the summer.
You sure about that? You sure about that?
I also have to highlight the fact that sex on screen is mostly thriving on HBO, which is known for creating an era of prestige TV and has almost become synonymous with sex since the popularity with shows such as The Sopranos and Sex and the City. I also think that sex on television is explored more than just sex. Sexuality isn't seen as just sex anymore. TV is able to critically explore sexual orientations and consent, which we see mostly in teenage dramas, and also psychological issues we see with characters like Roman in Succession, whose problems I couldn't even start to get into and deserve a video of their own. Although sex has always mostly been sold to men, more recently we see it's now being sold to women, though on a significantly lesser scale, which I associate with the fact that women prefer baby girl men to macho men. It seems people prefer sex to be saved for fan fictions and other literature, because if you've been on BookTok or Tumblr, or you've ever had Wattpad, you know. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you've gotten this far, please don't forget to like, comment and subscribe, and maybe give this video a share.